I promise that like you weren't born into this world hating yourself and feeling like you're not enough and that you don't measure up, and you were confident.
You've been working a lot over the years on your negative self-talk. Do you have any kind of knee-jerk reaction habits that you've trained yourself to do, or stuff you just do on a regular basis that helps you stay on top of it? Because I don't want to assume, and I mean, just in my own experience, it's not a case of you never have negative thoughts, right?
Never. No,
they're ever present.
Yeah.
It's more how you learn to manage them and what you make them mean about yourself. So I'm just curious if, like, what kind of practices you have to manage it.
That's a really good question. And I do agree with you. And I do want to say, like, first, if anyone's listening and they feel like they're in a place where your internal dialogue is negative, I remember living there and feeling like it was just my relationship with myself and my body, my physical body, and also just like with myself was so negative and toxic. But I thought that was like my inner dialogue. Like I thought that was my innate who I was. And I'm just want to say, like, that's not true. That's not true for anyone alive. If you've arrived in a place in your life where you feel so hard on yourself, I promise that like you weren't born into this world hating yourself and feeling like you're not enough and that you don't measure up, and you were confident. Little kids are so comfortable in their bodies. They live and they move in their bodies so innately and beautifully. And it's like, I don't know, I think it's different, but somewhere along the lines, many of us, especially women, that light kind of begins to dim. And I really do believe we're victims of obviously diet culture rhetorics being thrown at us and a million other things. But ultimately, if you're at this place where it's unhealthy, it can shift back. And that work is so important, but it does need to be intentional. And I'm here to say, like, now, like you said, I'm not always feeling confident. I'm not never having insecure thoughts or negative thoughts about myself, but the days where that's really prevalent in my mind are now the exception and not the rule. And that's a complete 180 of how I was 10 years ago.
It's not your default.
Exactly. And that is the biggest transformation, period. And that transformation has been the catalyst to any and every success in my career or in my life, because I simply could not be the mother that my son deserves, or the wife that I want to be, or the friend or sister or daughter, when I was spending so much time in my day consumed with what I was putting in my mouth and putting myself down. And I couldn't see it like that for a long time, but making the choice to do that self-work, the reason I say it like that is because it's not selfish. And lots of people, they just think, well, it's not about me. Like, I'm in the trenches, I'm a mom, or I'm, it's like you're worried about everyone else. And that's a beautiful, wonderful thing, but it's never selfish to work on yourself. And you don't need to be a martyr. When it comes to your self-worth and your self-talk, you do not need to self-sacrifice. It is not in anyone that you love's best interest to do so.
Yeah.
So prioritize your mental health, prioritize your emotional well-being and your physical, of course. But it's funny because it was actually the first like habit that, like practical, tangible tip, I guess, that I began with was back right when I was a new mom, kind of when everything started for me. And it was my husband. He obviously, like, I tried to keep it mostly inside, but I would let things slip. I'd see someone, or I'd compare myself, or I'd put myself down. And one day he just said, like, this is not good. Like, you're saying this a lot, and how can we help? Like, you wish so much you could make the people that you love see themselves as you see them, but you can't.
Sure.
But he just so lovingly suggested to me, like, I'm going to help you shift this. And he said, look, if I hear you say something negative about yourself, you have to stop, no matter what we're talking about, what we're doing. And you have to verbally out loud say 3 kind things about yourself. And he wasn't kidding. And it was like torture, you know, and it
Became
was
the
scary
police.
how often it started to happen. But he wouldn't just let me like shirk it off either. Like sometimes I'd have to sit there and it'd take me a minute. And at first it was never about like my physical appearance, but it was just like if I verbalized something negative about me, I had to consciously think about 3 positive things about myself. And that simple practice alone. And then I started to do it in my own mind, right? If I looked in the mirror after I got out of the shower and you immediately go to like what you think is a flaw. It's like, no, I forced myself to stand there and look at my body and remember that it grew a child and that that's a miracle. And remember that it keeps me alive every day and just loves me. Regardless of how horribly I speak to her or treat her, my body just is my best friend anyway. And it sounds weird or it sounds uncomfy, and it is at first, but those tangible things of calling yourself out essentially and redirecting those thoughts, because they're going to come, that's how you begin. That's one of the ways you can begin to shift that self-talk. And that is kind of where I personally started. And it gets easier. And then guess what? Like the negative does lessen. And that's just like one of many practices that you can use, right? But I think in some, like if you're at that negative place where that's your norm, please do the work. Like however that looks for you, there's nothing more important.
Yeah, I think that's a really, it's a good tip that people can take away and maybe just start to ideate on or think about, or even asking someone in the house to hold them accountable. I think as confronting as that can be, it's a good way to keep you in check. I think the biggest thing is for people to realize that when you're in this negative loop, if it's been happening for years and years and years, it's not something that's just going to stop the second you start doing the work, right? It's ongoing. And even I can only speak from my own experience, but even myself, it's been a few years now that I've been having more intention, focusing on myself, considering my thoughts. And it doesn't mean I never have negative thoughts, and it doesn't mean I don't fall into those spirals sometimes, but your bounce back becomes better. So I think don't use that as a sign that you're failing.
Never.
Just use it as a sign of you've just got another opportunity to keep practicing.
Yeah,
you know, and
healing
practice
is never
makes
linear.
perfect.
Not physical healing, not emotional healing, none of it. Like it will
Absolutely.
always be, just because you're dealing with the same trigger that you think you healed from again, doesn't mean that you failed. Doesn't mean that like the progress is lost. I like to believe that you are facing that trigger from a new angle as a more healed and stronger version of you. And this time when you face it, you're going to be even stronger and have a deeper perspective of that. But never shame yourself for facing something again.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not fair.
Yeah. If you guys enjoyed this clip, then you are bound to love the entire episode I did with this guest. I'm going to put a link to it up on the screen now, and make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss any future episodes.